One of the things that many people struggle with, perhaps particularly early in their career, is having tough conversations. And it's not kind to avoid the tough conversation, right? So the ability to have tough conversations is so important and often is the kindest thing to do.
Hello, and welcome to the Scientista Podcast, where women and science rule. This podcast is all about supporting powerful women who lead with their brains. I'm former Assistant Secretary of State Monica Medina, and unfortunately, Shweta Chakrabarty, my wonderful co-host, couldn't be with us today, but we are going to forge ahead with a wonderful guest. The Scientista Podcast brings you conversations with leaders, changemakers, and cultural figures, sharing how they've turned facts and evidence into real-world impact. So let's dive in. Today, our guest is Lindsay Levin, the co-founder of TED Countdown and CEO of the Blue Dot Network. Welcome, Lindsay. We are so happy to have you here today and excited for this conversation. And I know Shweta's really disappointed to miss it, so we're just going to have to make it extra great in thinking about her.
Thank you, Monica. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Lindsay, your career has taken you across industries, borders, and some pretty unexpected spaces. But at the heart of it all is your ability to bring people together. Was there a moment when you realized that convening leaders and creating space for these big conversations wasn't just a sort of a necessary or a fun second benefit to your work, but really part of who you are and what you can bring to the table?
Yeah, well, I think there were several moments. I'm a very curious person. I'm excited by the world. I'm excited by life and have been, since I was a young kid. And that curiosity means that I'm really interested in different opinions and different perspectives and different cultures and people who who come from different places. Um, and one of the things that results from that is I'm somebody who can always see many points of view. So I may have a particular point of view, but I can typically really understand other points of view. And I guess there were different moments where I realized that that was actually a gift, that the curiosity is a gift, that the ability to see different points of view and bridge divides is something very useful. So I found myself I think this is perhaps common for some of the people that were listening to this podcast. I was working, I was in business, I was building things, and I was very driven by wanting to make a positive impact in the world and very motivated by all the things that I thought were broken or wrong or weren't working for people. And that felt like quite a burden, oh my God, how am I going to help, improve the state of the world? And there was a particular moment when I realized that the gift that I had was that I could bring people in, introduce people, literally connect people, get people to come with me. When I created Leaders Quest, this is what we were doing, inviting people to come with me, to come and meet folks. It might be just the other side of the city, or it might be the other side of the world, but to actually spend time with people whose lives look very different to your own. And the realization for me was that if we're exposed to different points of view and different lives and different realities, that actually changes us. And then we make different choices. And when that really landed, and it was sort of born in an instant, actually, as a business idea to start Leaders Quest, I literally felt as if I had a backpack on that was full of rocks. And I got to put the backpack down and realize, oh, okay, it's not me that's going to change the world. It's all these other amazing people. And that, there are millions of them out there.
You're quite humble, but I think it is a gift to be able to bridge divides and bring people together. And it's an increasingly necessary one, given that we see so much division and divisiveness in society today, globally, and particularly here in the US. So I want to dig into that a little bit more. How has compassion and empathy how is that related to leadership? Because I think right now we think of leadership as strong and tough and hard, but really, I think one of the crucial things that leaders bring is compassion and empathy. So talk about that and how we meet this moment and how your experience helped you appreciate that even further? How did that evolve in your career?
Yes, yes. I mean, look, I think one of the things that human beings can get caught up in is that somehow for me to be right, you need to be wrong. And, in my experience, life is many, many different shades. And it's, of course, there are, certain situations where you can feel very clear that something is wrong. But generally speaking, once you dig in and understand where people are coming from, life is complicated, and people are nuanced, and so you sort of stepping in and appreciating that, I think, is really important. I, I've thought about two particular concepts, and I'm then going to add a third. But through the course of my work, one is how do we develop more wise leadership, and the other is, to the word that you just used, how do we develop more compassionate leadership? So if I start with the wise bit, I think a lot about, what I call the gap between being clever or smart and being wise. And I think we live in a world where we revere, in a way, being smart, knowing stuff, inventing stuff, creating amazing things, sending people into space, all the AI stuff we're doing. We're doing incredible things. Our species is capable of incredible things. Um, and at the same time, there's a kind of slower paced, what I would call wisdom, a deeper knowing, the capacity to perhaps know things that you can't unknow, that is very, very important and is particularly important in leadership. So this both being smart and able to drive things, but also being capable of being reflective and thoughtful, and self-aware and aware of the gap between, what is you and your personality acting versus the wider world. This, to me, is very important. Quality in leadership often perhaps in short supply. And then, to this idea of compassion, I think compassion is sort of empathy plus. It is the ability to really deeply relate to another person or other people or other forms of life, and to really experience a connection, um, and then to act from that place. So for me, I'm a person that is very wired for this sense of connection. I feel connected to all sorts of things. That's a big driver for me. I feel connected to nature. I feel connected to other people. I see the world that way. And I understand that other people don't necessarily, see the world that way. Um, I think we need to make sure we have plenty of people with those capacities in the leadership mix. And, oftentimes we're valuing other qualities, but not the ability to really relate to people. You could think of it as the ability to truly see another person. You could think of it as the best of our humanity, the best of our human qualities. And then the third thing that I want to mention that I think is really vital is the ability to get stuff done. I think of that as crunchiness. It's not an easy word to necessarily use. We're trying to create crunchy leaders, but what I mean by that is sort of crunchy versus soggy. If you're going to lead, if you're going to make things happen, you have to make choices and decisions, and sometimes those will be wrong. You have to, frankly, often do things that are far from perfect. It's like uh, progress versus perfection, and there's many trade-offs that go on in the day-to-day business of creating something or leading something. So this ability to be crunchy, to be sharp when you need to be sharp, and actually to get things done. I'm very struck in so many organizations by people working very hard and not getting very far, going round and round in circles, usually because of difficult dynamics between people or difficult politics between people, whatever
Absolutely.
it might be. There's so much wasted effort. And so the ability to kind of cut through and make things happen, enable other people to do things, I feel is all of that is very important. I think that the one other thing I'd say, in terms of all the polarization that we're experiencing now, which is extremely distressing, isn't it,
Oh,
to
it's
be living
really,
through?
it is like that backpack full of rocks that you're
Right.
carrying
It's
around all
it's
the time, but
so
all of that
depressing.
all the time.
It's so depressing. And when I think about that, I think the ability to bring some compassion to ourselves and others in that situation is very important. You know, behind the polarization, when you dig down, okay, people feel angry, and there are certain situations and where it may be appropriate to feel angry, but my
Or
sense is we
afraid,
have
or
re-
afraid of change, or afraid of the
exactly
unknown AI.
angry, fearful, etc. So there's a sort of, having compassion for that and recognizing it, but also recognizing we're not short of anger. Like, we've got plenty of anger. We've got plenty of anger. So how you work through that and recognize, as you say, behind that might be fear, behind that might be sadness, might be a sense of loss, might be a sense of grief. So the relating between, what is me and my own growth as a human being that's going on here versus what's happening in the wider world. So I think a lot about the mirroring that happens between what's happening on the inside for a person and then what they see and experience of the outside world. And paying attention to one another and our own well-being, being kind to ourselves, actually, and generous to ourselves, I think is really important in a time that feels so fraught.
I completely agree, and I know that Shutta would be so loving this conversation as a behavioral scientist herself, thinking about these interpersonal dynamics. And I loved your point about leaders who are sort of crunchy and get things done. In my own career, I know I tried to be both empathetic. Someone who could lead with compassion, but also show that you could get things done, because both inspire confidence in different ways. And it's the two together that
Right,
really make
right,
people so effective in leadership. It's not enough just to be tough and to bullnose your way to getting things done, or to be compassionate and give people lots of time, but as you said, go in circles and never really get anything done.
right.
So it's
I mean, I think, yes, one of the things that many people struggle with, perhaps particularly early in their career, is having tough conversations. And it's not kind to avoid the tough conversation, right?
it's
So
not.
the ability to have tough conversations is so important, and often is the kindest thing to do.
Yes, and it's isolating sometimes when you're that leader, because you want to be compassionate, but you also need to stand back and be able to have those tough conversations. Talk a little bit about that, about how people can learn that skill and how to know when you need to be more reserved, or when you need to pull back a little
Right,
bit as a
right,
leader.
right. I mean, yeah, it can be lonely, right? The buck stops with you. I'm my nature, I worry about stuff. I'm one of those people, unfortunately, who can be awake in the middle of the night, worried about the whole state of the world, things that are completely outside of my control, or worried about, things that are much more in my control. And what I've learned over time is I've been very fortunate, partly because of the curiosity piece and the exploring the world piece and all the things we created with Leaders Quest. I've spent a lot of time, and still spend a lot of time, with people, including folks who have really had to cope with tremendous adversity. And I've learned so much from them. So that's become a very powerful reference point. If I think about a couple of the people, of course, there's many people who've given me wonderful advice about technical stuff, or climate stuff, or business stuff, financial stuff. But, the people that have most helped me at the kind of deep spiritual level have been friends and mentors who've been through a lot of adversity. I had a friend early on in my Leaders Quest career, a gentleman called Naidu in India, who was a disabled man. He was elderly, he'd had polio as a child.
Oh my goodness.
And he set up the largest network working with the mentally ill across India in the poorest of communities.
Oh my goodness.
And, being very poor and very marginalized, and having mental illness is about as hard as it gets, with no access to resources. So Naidu worked in very tough circumstances. And we became, for whatever reason, we just had a connection and we became very good friends. And he was one of the people that taught me, and he would do it with a smile, that my kind of drive and ambition, in a way, I had to smile at myself. So sometimes I said to him, God, Naidu, I'm trying to do this and I'm trying to do that. And absolutely exhausted. And I remember him saying to me once, Lindsay, it's in your nature. When you see a mountain, you'll always climb the mountain, and you'll get to the top of the mountain and you'll look out, and all you will see as far as the eye can go is more mountains. This is kind of the universe. This is what you're part of. And so that the idea of actually we're enough. I'm doing enough. It's okay. It's okay. Is a very important piece of the how do you ground yourself when things feel adverse. And so this idea of learning from people who have developed tremendous resilience and are still full of joy and really, making the most of life and able to celebrate, that's been very shaping for me. And the other thing I would just say in terms of, how one restores oneself, and I know this is a common one for many people, but for me, nature is so
Nature.
important. And so just go outside, look at a tree, get into that different time cycle and the wonder of nature and life. And that just never ceases to amaze me and excite me. Um,
Yeah, I think
and
that's
it's
a
very
common
grounding.
theme in a lot of mental health and sort of spirituality is that ability to get outside and just pull yourself back and
Right.
away from your little phone screen or your little computer screen and take a bigger breath in the world around you and appreciate the things that are there, and particularly nature. It can be so uplifting. Which gets me to our a topic I really wanna explore with you, which is the TED Countdown work that you're doing. It's so smart to bring together the TED storytelling, personal, compelling, um, narrative with the urgency of climate change. How did it hit you that these two things were going to be even better together? And was there a specific moment where you kind of had that aha, or was it something more gradual that occurred over conversations with other TED leaders?
Yeah, it definitely came about over conversations. I was already working in the leadership space. I was doing a lot in climate. And I happened to sit down in 2019 and have dinner with Chris Anderson, the head of TED. And he was just in the middle of thinking about doing something, a first in TED's history, creating a conference or a summit that was just focused on climate change and in particular solutions to climate. And he'd been kind of inspired and challenged to do that by a couple of longtime TEDsters. One was Al Gore, who of course has done incredible work, and also incredible TED Talks over the years. And the other is an investor called John Doerr.
Mm,
And John and
another
Al had,
leader. Yeah.
yeah, amazing leaders. So two incredible leaders and Chris were playing with this idea. And I had the good fortune, to be honest, to come across them just as they were figuring this out. And I said, well, I think I can help you. And, happily the next day, Chris called up and said, okay, let's proceed with this conversation.
Great.
So, and it went from being originally we were going to do one conference. The pandemic came along. This was 2020. We turned it into a huge virtual, like 6-hour YouTube thing, crazy thing that we did, but it reached a lot of people. And then it became apparent that this should be an ongoing initiative. And actually, John challenged us and said, look, I want you to commit for the decade to doing this. And so we've been working on the basis that TED is an amazing platform, with an incredible reach. And, the ability to bring a media platform like that to climate is obviously very powerful. And that we collaborate with many others. So with Leaders Quest, my previous organization is very involved, and lots of others. We're very inclusive. We're very much about building collaborations and trying to celebrate other people's work and ideas and use our platform effectively. And what we're trying to do is to shift the story, to give people a sense of what's possible, to show how much is underway. Often, when you're in the midst of it, it's hard to see, but to so change the story, to accelerate solutions by sharing solutions that, stories that need to be told and that need to get, amplified. And, kind of walking our own talk by building what I call radical collaborations. So, we firmly believe that we need all kinds of people from all kinds of disciplines to build the sort of future that we all want and deserve. And so collaboration is very important. And I would say now we're 5 years in, which is kind of an interesting point. We just completed a wonderful summit in Nairobi with 700 leaders, most of them from Africa and the Global South, and a
Wonderful.
mix of TED Talks and Quest experiences out in communities. It was really phenomenal. And so as we stand now, we're thinking, okay, we've managed to establish a lot of trust. I think people kind of get what we do and how we can contribute. We have definitely accelerated a lot of important ideas, through the TED stage and podcasts and other kinds of things. And so now we're asking ourselves, as we go into the second half of this decade, how we can be most useful. And we're in the midst of figuring out what we really need to double down on and how we can work with others to make progress.
Well, it's interesting as we have this conversation, the recent flooding in the U.S. that killed so many people, that is clearly a storm that was exacerbated by
Right,
climate change. So I think that storytelling and helping to convince people that this
right,
is real, that this is not something down the road, it's not something that's going to hurt somebody else. It could be you in the face of that wall of water or that hurricane or that fire. And yet, interestingly, the current Trump administration has mocked climate, called it a hoax, and talked about doomism. And in fact, I think what you've done is actually flipped the script and talked about the possibility and how we aren't powerless in the face of these
right, right,
climate
right.
superstorms. So talk about that, about how
Yeah,
you flipped the script and talked about possibility and why.
right. Right. I mean, look, we probably most people listening are well aware that this is a very serious situation that we're in, and we are seeing, we are seeing the weather is changing. Right now, the weather is changing. We're seeing all sorts of effects and impacts. So there's a lot of things that you can easily feel doomy and gloomy about. And I think that a lot of the people who are drawn to working on climate, by definition, they're people who work on big, complicated problems. And it's easy to get very caught up in that. And yet, human beings are capable of remarkable things. And one of the things I've learned from the Leaders Quest work that I've done over the years, I've spent lots and lots of time in communities. That's kind of really where I'm most at home. And, people do remarkable things all the time. And there is leadership happening on a local level at scale all the time. So showing that, and kind of, it's almost, you got to get out more, right? If you're reading the reading the media,
Right.
scrolling the wrong stuff,
Scrolling, doom scrolling.
yeah, it's easy to get overwhelmed. So I think I truly think that we're living at a very, very exciting time. And I agree, I recognize that the stakes are really high. I recognize that in this immediate moment, a lot of the politics feel extremely difficult and almost overwhelming. But somehow I think in the midst of all of that turmoil, it's not going to be linear. Just as the climate stuff is not happening in a super sweet, calm, linear fashion. Change happens in fits and starts and bursts, and um, actually, in amidst this fight, you could say some of the old is dying right now, and there's a lot of struggle going on around that. So we choose to focus, and it's not difficult once you look. We choose to focus on people who are trying to solve problems. And we choose to focus on the idea that we need all kinds of minds and skills, that it's not helpful to be, of a view that it's this solution or not, or my way or the highway kind of thing. This is generally not helpful. That we need trial and error. Some things we try, some things don't work, but we need engineering minds. We need scientists. We need business people and finance people and policy people and entrepreneurs and we need activists and, people who are leading nonprofits and community leaders and artists and creators. So there is a sort of innate celebration of all of that. And we find that people get really excited when they, see all of those connections. Another of the things that we're thinking about that I know relates to your work is how we tell stories and who the storytellers are. I think if I could sort of reference the climate community, which in itself is even an unfortunate term because somehow we've got to make climate just be part of everyday life as opposed to something different and separate.
Separate.
Yeah, there's been an inclination that we need to tell people that, either it's a moral imperative or that we need to really get people to respond to the urgency. And it's true, there is morality in all this and there is urgency. But these things, whilst they might switch some people on, they don't switch everybody on. And so one of the things we're really focused on right now is who are people who are trusted, who build community in different fields unrelated to climate. Who are the creators? Who are the community builders? And how do we help them just embed climate messaging in the everyday work that they're doing so that this is part of normal life? It's not some special, different,
Right.
kind of depressing, separate topic.
Or something that is made up or somehow exaggerated in some way
Right,
to make you afraid, as opposed to really just facing it and saying,
right,
okay, because I think when you have a sense of agency and knowledge, you have more ability to
right,
things
right.
around
And
and
you're
feel
right, Monica, to reference. I mean, there is, those of us working in climate or who care about these issues, there is a lot of disinformation. There is a lot of misinformation. There are, a lot of distorted stories, and that can be very hard for people to respond to because you almost feel, unless you've got a PhD in this, you're not qualified to
right.
comment, which is very hard. And so we are in some difficult battles for sure. And I think there are times and there are situations and there are topics where it's appropriate to be very tough sort of in the fight, shall we say. But there's also a need to make this part of ordinary life and actually to just lean into, we want to have a healthy planet. We want to live
You like
with
clean
clean
air
air.
and clean water,
Yeah, we want
healthy
these
food
things.
that's not full of
And it's
chemicals.
not, it doesn't need to be entangled with all sorts of other issues. We need to create a broad tent and just a recognition that we're dependent upon nature and the earth, and that's where our food comes from and everything that we use, and it shouldn't be so complicated. Actually, the idea that we need to just work in harmony with the natural world around us.
Are you thinking in particular about journalists? I've been struck by how reluctant they are to talk about climate in this moment because it has been so vilified. Everything green is bad.
Yeah,
And about their lack of understanding really of the kind of these bigger forces. And I don't mean that they need to all be PhD scientists, but they don't feel comfortable talking about just the basics. And so they shy away from it completely.
right. Yeah, no, I think that's happened. I mean, one of the things that gives me hope is that I think these things go in cycles and everything's always changing. And so right now there is, especially in the US, this sort of hushing going on and some words that people don't want to use and so on and so forth. I don't think that will last.
Not.
I think
I
that'll
hope you're right.
turn. Yeah, it'll turn, and if so, some of it is just trusting that nothing is fixed. Everything is changing all the time. Events are happening around us. This is very unfortunately turning out to be an unbelievably hot year in many places.
Yes, in Europe,
With
it's unbelievably.
unbelievable, unbelievable. Yeah, I was talking to my mum yesterday, who's 86. She is in a retirement community. They don't have air conditioning. She lives in Britain. It's really, really extraordinary. So, things are changing and nothing is fixed. So, one of the things with journalists and other communicators is that we've been doing really effective outreach to people who are not climate communicators, but who are interested to learn. So that can be traditional journalists, but it's also creators, social media creators.
Right.
So we have a
Yeah.
big program
There's a
running
big
right now.
spectrum of people who have a platform to talk to the
Right,
public.
right. So we're working right now on a program with social media creators that is actually proving incredibly exciting. So what we found, we're working with an organization called Conspirators, and they've been reaching out to creators with big followings. So people who they might be a chef with a great following, or a
Right.
mother with a great following, or a farmer, or whatever it is they do, and saying, if you're interested in learning more about climate, we'll help you. So we've been running workshops to equip them to feel more confident. We just brought a bunch of them to our summit in Nairobi. We brought 14 creators, 80 million followers between them. These
Wow.
have
Oh gosh, I
incredibly
hope they start
right. And
spreading the
so
word.
what are we learning? When we talk to those people, they they typically are saying, I would love to communicate about this, but I don't necessarily feel confident enough. And so I need help to feel confident enough, because there is all of this pushback. They also, one of the things I find very encouraging is in that creator community, they build followings actually not through doom and gloom. The reason somebody follows them is because they find them exciting or inspiring, and
Entertaining, fun.
yeah, they're fun. So they're not looking for the cynical story. They are they're very open actually to positive stories and to sharing examples of what's happening. So there's a lovely kind of freshness, which is very encouraging. And the other thing that I think is really important for those of us in the climate world to think about is they want to tell stories their way. They're not interested in us saying, this is what you need to tell
Here are your
everybody.
talking points.
Yeah, these are your talking points. Because guess what? They know that people are not actually interested in those talking points, and they're much better themselves at formulating things that are of interest. So, in general, we're trying to be very thoughtful about how we engage with people who are community leaders. They might be faith leaders, they might be doing stuff in real life, they might be doing stuff, virtually, um, to make this more part of everyday life, and how we actually trust people to communicate in ways that they know will resonate.
That's so interesting. Let them figure out the way to say it because they're good at this.
Right, exactly.
So, I want to ask a question about gender and climate because I think you probably honed in a little bit on that as well. And wonder if you could talk about kind of how it plays out both, at TED or in your various other roles and gender and leadership. Again, kind of talking about how to give young women, young scientistas, our
Right,
audience out there who's just starting out, some advice that might help them get ahead in a world where sometimes women have a challenge on that.
right. Yeah. I mean, just by way of background, so I started my career a long time ago, and I started in very, very male industries. I was literally often the only woman in the room in 100 people. So for me, that was normal. I now know it's not normal, but at the time, so I was in this sort of, I just got
It
on with
was.
it, and I was me. And so actually, my biggest encouragement to people is to just be you. I was me. I did things my way. I didn't overly dwell on, um, why this might be difficult. I actually sometimes saw advantages. So that's where I came from. And I know we live in a very different world now. I think women are incredibly important in all of these spaces. I mean, having been in this very male-dominated world early in my career, in the work I do today, we tend to have many more women in our teams. Actually, many female skills that are typically associated with women, I don't want to stereotype people,
But
turn out to be really effective in the kind of work that I do, whether it be the leadership stuff, the experiential stuff, the climate stuff. And so I've got a very deep appreciation for the breadth of skills and the different ways of looking at things that are often associated with females. And I think that those things are very, very important in leadership and in the world. And it's still depressing when you look at these political lineups all over the world and see barely any women in those kinds of roles, which seems, I think is a big, big problem. So I think, my encouragement to women is to be themselves. I know that in in Countdown, at least 50% of the talks that we feature are women. We don't have to make an effort to do that. It just happens naturally. There's a lot of women doing incredible work. And, so having the confidence to step out and
Yep.
make things happen and
Yep.
is, I just think, fundamental.
Yep. I think you've given us so much great advice. We always ask at the end about how our guests have dealt with adversity, and you've given already a lot of great advice on that. So I'm gonna change the question up a little bit for you in particular, and say, how would you advise women about mentoring other women when they hit adversity? I think, sometimes women are reluctant to ask for help, and other women can step in and help them. So advise our scientistas out there
Mm,
about being
mm.
mentors or supporters to others, and particularly other women.
I mean, I would say don't be afraid to ask or to offer. When people ask me for help, I'm delighted to help. Uh, you know, frankly, I should have asked a lot more for help earlier in my career,
Good advice. Ask
yeah.
for
So
help.
ask,
Don't
ask for
struggle.
help, ask for help. One and offer. I have 3 kids grown up now. I actually now have 2 little grandchildren as well.
Me too. Just became a grandmother, so
Yes, very, very
wonderful.
wonderful. All the things people say are true, it seems. And so the business of working and having children was very much, I was in that position, and I didn't actually have a lot of other friends who were in the same position as me at the time. So for any women with children or thinking about having children, I would really, I think we need to be super mutually supportive. The judgment about how you handle work and
Family.
family. Yeah, I really, again, do it your way. I mean, really, we don't need to be judgmental and perfectionist about that stuff. And I think that gets in the way a lot for women, and it's very unfortunate. So I'm a bit of a rebel in that regard. My kids survived me and my career, and they've turned out just fine and are my best friends today. So there's something about being generous to one another and generous to yourself, and recognizing that if you're working hard and building something important in terms of your career, your children actually, by the way, in later life, probably be very proud of you.
Mhm.
So you may be aware of the things you're missing, but that there are other things that one gains.
That's right. That's so right. I totally agree. I know exactly where you're coming from on the judgment, and I think we need to be supportive of each other's choices. And now, luckily, there are more options in the middle between
Right.
all work,
Totally.
right?
Totally.
And so I think young women today should step into families and careers if that's what they
If
want.
that's what they want, if
And
that's
it,
and equally, if it's not what you want, you don't want to feel pressured because everybody's talking about that all the time. So there's all women come in all shapes, sizes, flavors, right?
that's
And
right.
we need to be able to, live life in our different ways.
Agreed. And I hope the men out there will feel the same freedom to make those options
Right.
available to themselves, so that we have a
Exactly.
lot more choices as parents. And particularly for women, though, it's hard. And so I appreciate your advice, and I hope it's helpful to scientistas out there. Thank you so much, Lindsay. This was a great conversation, so inspiring. And we're really grateful for your time. Thanks out there, scientistas, for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, help others to discover it by leaving us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and tell your friends. We really appreciate your support. You can always find us at scientista.world for more stories, updates, and ways to get involved. Thank you again, Lindsay, for your time and for
Thank
all
you,
your
Monica.
wonderful
Thank
advice
you.
and all
Thanks
your
for
great work. Keep it up.